she can scrap it. Yeah. This scribe jabber, she'll scrap it. Okay.
All right, you ready? The distance you have to be from the microphone varies so much in these rooms. Good morning, everyone. Are we awake? No? Yes?
Give me that one.
Give you an hour?
Downstairs.
Caffeine drips are available in the hallway. All right. It is 10:01, so let's get started. This is the Sacm meeting again. Please sign the blue sheets. We have reluctant, oh, we're in the wrong meeting, aren't we? Okay, so we've done, so blue sheets are circulating. We have a note taker and scribes, or scribe, singular. And there is a note well. We've seen the note well early in the week. All of you look familiar, so you know what the note well is. Administrative tasks we've done. Next. I don't know. Oh, I thought they had agreed.
You gave me a look, I gave you a look.
Okay, so Jim is the scribe. You will take notes, thank you. I always thought those significant looks meant something, so.
I had heard that making eye contact was bad around here, but I didn't know exactly what it meant.
I don't know who walked in late. That's who I got last time, was the person who walked in after the meeting started, so.
No.
Nancy's going to continue fumbling in the back.
Nancy's not awake, and Nancy has to leave soon.
All right, thank you, Charles and Jim. Okay, we don't know where Hank is. Anyway, well, let's just go ahead and get started with the endpoint information data model. Where's Danny? There you are. There is no pink box. I think, will you survive?
I think right here is probably pretty good. Cool. All right, so just kind of give a little background on this whole session, I guess, because it maybe isn't clear by the name. But so as part of, a while back when we submitted SWIT M&A, we also submitted OVAL to the working group. And now that the information model is getting kind of further along, we wanted to kind of start thinking about, actually picking up the actual OVAL work and trying to develop that data model for use in Sacm. And so really what this is on the list, maybe after the Buenos Aires meeting, I had proposed or put out a list of the different types of data models that we need to develop kind of out of that OVAL work, anything from, collection guidance and evaluation guidance to representing information on the endpoint and all that. And so I didn't get much feedback on that, so I kind of just went along with starting with the representing the actual endpoint information. And in previous discussions as well on the list, a few, OVAL is based in XML, and some people kind of showed support for that. Other people said they might prefer something like JSON or CBOR. So it's kind of just to kick off that discussion and get people kind of thinking about it. I don't think we'll make any decisions here, but that's something we'd like to work towards. So we can go to the next slide. We'll just run through the agenda, basically, go through kind of some of the things we want to think about as we go and pick our data format for this data model. Kind of a very high level intro to, CBOR, JSON, and XML. It's not really going to go into any detail. There's lots of references at the end. Definitely go look at those to actually learn more. And then just a few quick observations that we noted along the way, kind of starting into this whole process. And then lastly, just next steps. So we can go to the next slide. So really the big things here we have to look at are, well, the actual Sacm requirements. We'll kind of talk about those in a little bit. And really we just want to think of, so OVAL is kind of a community built standard, if you will, and kind of served its purpose there and is continuing in that space. But now we need to think of, what does Sacm need? Has a different set of requirements, in kind of a bigger scope here. So what do we want for Sacm? What do we want this to look like? So yeah, we can go to the next slide. Yeah, that's good. So really, we haven't gone too deep into this, but we're starting to look at the actual requirements, kind of going, requirement by requirement, specifically focusing on data model requirements and kind of looking, at kind of what we need out of this OVAL work and kind of how the requirements in Sacm may potentially influence the different data format that we pick. We'll kind of talk about maybe some things that are a little later. And really we have to think of, so there's both shoulds and musts in the requirements. Do we want to, what do we want to pull out of there and which ones do we really care about? And then obviously the schema languages, those can have a slight impact as well. So just hop over to the next slide. So to start things off, Hank, feel free to correct me if I say anything stupid about CBOR. I know you had some comments at one point on this, but really it's just a compact binary data formats. I guess newer out of the three, really focuses on having encoding and decoding software with a small footprint, having compact message size. So when you're transferring stuff over the wire, it's better there. I know on with XML and OVAL, people have complained over the years saying that we have, they just can't ship this stuff around, these giant XML, talking, many megabyte XML documents across the network can be challenging. CBOR also has the data definition language, which is useful. And I believe that can also, in addition to CBOR, it can be used to, used with JSON as well. On the con side, given it's relatively new, probably not as much software there, and it probably hasn't been tested as much as, say, something like XML. I know they're both, there are some general implementations out there. We haven't really got to look at them or play around with them, but it's something we would definitely like to do and learn more about. But supposedly it should be pretty easy to kind of roll your own as well. I'm not sure what that impact has on interoperability between implementations. And then obviously, because it's binary, it's not human readable. So go to the next slide. JSON kind of, I guess, is in the middle of the two. It's less verbose than XML, maybe a little bit more than CBOR. It's definitely, after XML came out and after JSON came out, kind of has picked up adoption really quickly, and a lot of people seem to prefer JSON over XML. But there are some kind of tricky things with that we'll talk about maybe a little bit later. And the kind of interesting thing we found is, so there is a JSON schema, but it's just an expired informational draft, internet draft. So I don't know, if people are continuing to actually use that, and whether or not that kind of impacts our decision to move forward with that. Just something we'll have to consider. And I think it expired in 2013, so it's been a few years before anyone has actually done anything with it. But okay, we can hop over to the next slide. Then lastly, XML. I don't think this one really needs much of an introduction. It's pretty, I think, robust. There's a lot of different features, looking at things like, even beyond just, as a serialization, you get things like XPath, XQuery, a lot of good validation tools and APIs out there. And obviously you get the, it's too verbose. There's just a lot of stuff there. It can become overly complex depending on how you design it. And yeah, so it's something we'll have to look at. But this would be the easiest because, if we could use oval as it is with modifications if we want this route, but that's something we'll have to decide. Next slide. So yeah, so between CBOR and JSON, really, with CBOR, you say something, Kathleen?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Kathleen Moriarty, No Hat. So you have a really large install base with XML.
Yep.
How much, I guess one of the things to understand too, besides just the language differences, is how would that user base be affected? And would we see an increase in user base? And would it affect interoperability between the existing user base who has, I guess, a different oval than what we'll wind up with anyway?
Yeah.
So maybe it doesn't, maybe the whole thing
So
is
you're talking
moot.
about
Like, are they going to be incompatible anyway, so it doesn't matter? And then are they really stuck in XML in terms of their tools, programming, and choices of being able to do things? So is it locked in?
Yeah, so I mean, all the current implementations obviously use Oval, and it's an XML,
Yep.
And they've been using it for a while.
And it's about 50, right?
What's that?
The number is about 50?
Maybe around there. Yeah,
40,
it's
50, okay.
yeah. Trying to think of like the latest numbers, but that's what they've used. There's been challenges, and really, I just want to, if we want to keep XML, that's fine with me. I just want to give people the opportunity to say, hey, let's change. And,
Yeah, I'm not a fan of XML. I'm just
yeah.
I'm just asking the questions so that.
And so,
we're all
yeah,
informed.
I think it would be, I think we need to get their opinions on this as well. Because obviously within the Oval community, there's a clear understanding that what we build here is not necessarily going to be compatible. But if we're expecting them to, kind of move to this, we need to get their input on it. And
Okay.
yeah.
Well, and I guess CBOR, I got it yesterday, is even being used by Fido and other places. So it is taking off more than I had even realized. Cricket, do you know how to share? No, okay. So whatever the group decides is fine. I just want to make sure that we consider all of those points. And if they're going to be incompatible anyway, maybe changing languages doesn't matter because maybe, JSON's easier to program and tool with.
Yeah.
Maybe CBOR makes things easier and lets us extend into IoT and other spaces. So, which is probably going to have an even bigger need for this kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, just to make it clear, there is no expectation for compatibility between the two.
Adam Montville, No Hat. So I think because this is kind of breaking backwards compatibility, right?
Yeah.
What we intend to do does open up the space to consider the changes. I don't have a favorite, and I'm not sure it's going to matter all that much because like in all the implementations of Oval today,
Mhm.
I don't know how many of those are actually directly processing that Oval versus converting it to something else that they actually do understand internally.
Mhm.
So really, in some cases, and I'm not sure if that's a majority, a minority, or somewhere in the middle, they may have to just write a new translator.
Yeah.
Right. With JSON, I think that we go more into the realm of convention over, the reason it's being adopted by so many developers is because you don't need a schema to use JSON. You just understand what the other people want and you give it to them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to be, it's pretty loose, I think. So I don't know if that's going to be specific enough for our needs, but we'll have to see. And like I said, I have no favorite. I just want to do the right thing.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yep. So that's why we're having this discussion, kind of kick it off. Yeah, I don't know as far as, who's using oval natively versus translating it to something else. I know of both, but I don't have any concrete numbers on that really. So yeah, so to kind of keep going onto this, so really, so you can convert back and forth between CBOR and JSON, going from CBOR to JSON, because CBOR kind of builds on JSON is a little bit more tricky. I think right now it's just some kind of guidelines. I don't know, Hank, if at any point are they looking to develop more concrete conversion guidelines
Between XML and
CBOR and JSON?
CBOR and JSON is not a big problem to convert. There are CBORs basically considered a superset.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I'm repeating myself because this is Hank and I was not at the mic. Basically, CBOR is considered to be a superset of JSON. So if you start with CBOR and then want to break down it to JSON again, that might be a little bit tricky. Starting with JSON, as having JSON in the back of your mind, and then creating a data definition that, for example, uses CDDL. It is kind of easy to at the very leaf parts of the definitions, where, example, byte strings come in play, which are, of course, handled differently in CBOR, which is a binary representation, than in JSON. You have to make specific distinctions there. But the general superstructures and such are typically all the same. If you think about using both, it is not as difficult as one might think to create a data definition that encompasses both worlds. Also, regarding to legacy JSON, which is now which was called XML yesterday, we have there is a way to retain all the features and capabilities of a complex type, for example, in XML. You can incorporate a name and something that resembles a namespace descriptor into a structure in a JSON or CBOR, and therefore, for example, can then again include a map for the attributes and some arrays for the elements, and then basically you can rebuild XML. I'm pretty sure nobody really wants to do that, but if you are forced to do it and there is actually no other way out of there, then you can, of course, retain all the capabilities of XML in a JSON or CBOR represented language. But it is not recommended to do so. It is recommended to refactor the whole structure and then work around that static mapping.
Okay. Thanks.
Adam Montville again, no hat. I have, I think, a clarifying question about all this. So, and not just this slide.
Yeah, sure.
So we're talking about CBOR, JSON, XML, which are, I think, serializations, right?
Yep.
So are we talking about deciding eventually on one? I seem to remember, I think it might have been even last IETF, we talked about information model being put into a data model is being serialized in some format, right? So are we limited, are we ultimately going for one of these, or are we just looking at all three of them to see which ones are better suited for certain purposes? Because I can see, for example, CBOR being interesting in constrained devices. I can see XML being interested in other places, JSON in other places.
Yeah, so I think we'll definitely trying to better understand all three and see which one makes the most sense. So at some point, we, when we build this data model, we have to kind of pick something, right? Something that we're going to implement, right? For, think of SWID in XML versus, SWID is in CBOR. And it's just, what one do we want to start with? But, at some point, you could do all of them, depending, if it makes sense.
Roman Danilo, sir. I think the distinction Adam's talking about is we don't have to start with a data model. We could start with an information model, and then from the information model have multiple data models, whether it's JSON, CBOR, or something else. And that might be a decision we want to talk about.
So actually, I think I think I'm one layer below that. So let's talk about a data model and then how do we serialize that? So there could be different bindings. There's a binding of a data model to JSON, a binding to CBOR, a binding to XML. So yeah, we may have to decide on one initially. But I just wanted to clarify that we're not necessarily in my opinion, hat off. Not necessarily constraining to one over another. We might just pick one to start with, but then be accepting of other bindings. Is that a fair
Yeah,
statement, or-
I agree with that. I think at some point too, though, Sacm does have to select mandatory to implement once. But yeah,
So is that, Adam, this is Roman Dana talking again. So is that the same thing as saying we're going to not make an information model, or so we're going to go straight data model, no information model?
I don't think that's the same thing. Sorry. We can talk about that if you want, but
Well, we should.
okay, good.
how are we doing for time, by the way?
I don't know, Adam's probably out using it. Okay, so I'm Jessica. Question for
Jess.
Danny, huh?
I said, hey, Jess.
Have you determined what parts of our very large information model this discussion applies to, or does it apply to the entire information model? And she says, hi, Danny.
For this discussion, we're specifically talking about configuration information. So, with respect to kind of what we're going to use Oval for. So I hope that answers your question. Jim, let me know if it doesn't. So yeah, and then so basically, as I mentioned before, CDDL could be used to kind of define, what the structure should look like and things like that. So we can just go on to the next slide, I guess. So kind of one interesting thing we found with respect to JSON is kind of as the spec was developed, I think it originally started as a ECMA spec and then kind of went to the IETF, and it wasn't always clear with, like, when you're creating objects, are the different, does the order of the actual members matter? What happens if you have two members with the same name? How does that get processed? And really, it kind of came down to them creating, the IETF creating the iJSON or Internet JSON RFC, and basically where they said that the order doesn't really matter, and basically don't create objects with duplicate names because of the difficulties with the interoperability. So that kind of, I think if we go to the next slide, I think there, so that kind of impacts what we do, right? Because we have in our information model, we have lists and ordered lists. So that's gonna, we're gonna have to deal with that if we decide to use JSON. What one thing you could do is use arrays and kind of put them in there, each information element in there. I guess if you have a kind of a complex subject one, but obviously it makes the format more complex, and it's going to be something we have to just decide and look at and play around with to find out. So yeah, so we can go to the next slide. And then on XML, kind of already talked about it, but dealing with kind of open content, right? So with DTDs, there's not really a way to do it. And with schemas, you can use things like XSDNE and open content and kind of call out in different parts of your schema where you want it to be extensible. And really, what we have to, you just kind of have to, I guess, going on to the next slide, you really have to think about, kind of as you're designing your schema, where do we want this extensibility to be? How does that impact interoperability? And because, you can put all sorts of different things in there, and you can make some really, great schemas that are extensible. You can make some really lousy ones, and we just have to kind of, deal with that and kind of balance things out and hopefully end up with something useful. But yeah, so let's go to the next slide. So really, like I said, this is kind of an introductory thing. I added this first bullet here, investigate Yang. I was talking with Dave Waltemeyer, and he mentioned that you can express something in Yang and then convert it to XML to JSON. And I think they're also doing some work to convert it to CBOR. You look uneasy, Hank, is that? Feel free. But just something we wanted to look at a little bit more. But yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I think we already investigated that. But that might be not in a so prominent way as we plan to do it now. So okay, it is heavily used, yes, and there's some because the Yang somehow, funnily, is closely intertwined thing that both does data at rest modeling and data in motion. It somehow derives the data in motion from the data at rest representation it defines. And there are some restrictions to Yang. Somehow circular references are not allowed. Actually, grouping seems to be a good thing, but if you actually try to build something that was once XML with groupings, you realize that's not how it's supposed to work. It has a great augment system that cannot, for example, augment enumeration then again. That's just strange. And so there are some hidden and not so obvious restrictions that come with Yang. And one should check very carefully if this is actually a really good way to use it.
Yeah, so we definitely want to do that. Thanks. And so then really kind of something we started to do, but we're not finished yet, was actually just kind of looking at the requirements and seeing kind of how the different data formats map to them and what, if any, challenges there may be there. Then obviously eventually we'd like to pick something to start developing our data model with. They'll probably involve kind of, as we do some more research, kind of just maybe prototyping some of the information elements that we have and seeing what things look like and what people like, want to use and what they like. So yeah, so that's pretty much all I had for this session. I think, yeah. Yeah, so then it's just a bunch of links that people can look at.
Jim Schad, putting on a couple of different hats at this point in time. One of the things that you didn't talk about that I think you need to include in the evaluation process is the security representations that we actually have for the different different serializations that we're looking at. So, I mean, you need to look at the COSI work, the Jose work, the XML Digitech XML encryption work,
Okay.
and include that as part of your evaluation process, because the things you can express in those are not quite the same, and so you need to know what you need to express, and the difficulty of implementing them is quite possibly significantly different.
Okay, thanks.
It's the Danny show.
No, it's gonna be Hank soon, right? All right, yeah. So I just want to give a quick update on kind of some of the issues we talked about Monday and the traffic on the list, and maybe some other things that may not make people happy. So yeah, we go to the next slide.
I never want you to introduce me.
We'll just jump right in. So the first IPFix syntax issue that we talked about on Monday was kind of around the template we're going to use for information elements. So we had one proposal to add a new structure property to include things like the definition of our lists, possibly enumerations, flags. I didn't really hear any strong objections to not including it, so I thought maybe we could just kind of put it in there. I think it will. I know you asked maybe some more clarifying questions, Adam. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that, or if wasn't it you? Or I could be wrong. Might have been someone else.
Yeah, on the list, you mean?
Yeah.
I'm struggling to remember what I wrote, to be honest.
You were basically just wondering if we needed it or not.
What?
Sorry, put you on the spot.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, so I think, it's really just going to be for certain data types. I don't think it's going to be a major issue. It's just going to make life easier. As I mentioned, Jim was kind of writing up some code to kind of process this and maybe even auto generate the information elements to make life easy. So it seems like that could be useful. Right now, or I guess previously, these constructs were jammed in the description along with prose text, or even as the last iteration, list definitions were embedded in the data type property. So I think breaking it out makes sense. So then the next one was basically, we had a suggestion to update the status field to say current added in, version X, or, deprecated in version Y. There's some concerns about embedding a bunch of semantics into one field. So one alternative that was suggested is we could use the revision and date fields that are already there. However, that's kind of nice because it's clean, but there's also a suggestion that we may want to have some more detailed versioning as outlined in something like Semver. There would have to be, I guess, some additional thought and work into that. But in kind of thinking about it a tiny bit, I realized I think it's more of an operational issue when we get to actually having a registry and adding things to it. So I thought maybe we could just kind of not deal with this right now and wait until we're ready to publish it.
Adam Montville and No Hat again. I remembered.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think adding the new structure, yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Adding the new structure, I think what I said was, let's not embed too many semantics into one thing,
Yeah.
and let's make it a tuple. And then I think Chris came back, or somebody, one of these two characters said, hey, isn't a list really just a tuple? And I just kind of left it because he's right. So if we, in other words, I don't want to embed, and the same thing I think goes for the second one. Like, I'd prefer to say, like, deprecated in version Y. I don't know, to me that feels like it's multiple semantics being put into one label.
Yeah.
And I prefer to have one label mean one thing, not many.
Okay.
But that's me, No Hat. So
No, yeah, I agree with that. Definitely with respect to the second one. And I think by having that structure property, breaking it out from the description and the data type property, I think that will help as well with that.
Okay. Yes.
So yeah, so basically what I want to do with the second one is just say, hey, we'll just kind of deal with this when we're ready to, publish the RFC with our initial set of information elements. Does anyone have an objection to doing that? Like, is it something we really need to decide right now?
Can you say that one more time? That was really loud. Sorry. Can you state it one more time?
Oh, yeah. I basically wanted to know, do we really need to deal with the information element versioning question right now? Because before, prior to publishing the information model with our initial set of information elements, there's no version associated with them. I don't even think if, we can change them. It's kind of pre-release, if that makes any sense.
So to paraphrase that then, is the versioning scheme on information elements really critical to decide at this moment, or can we defer it until later?
Yeah.
So Chris says defer, just so it's on the record here. Oh, you want to hum it? Is that okay? So you want to do that?
No.
No.
Go ahead.
What? Do that. Okay. I guess we'll hum it then in the room. Do you want to prepare for that, or is it not worth it?
Oh, no, I'm fine here.
You're fine there. Got it. Okay. You go
People
ahead.
that are active hummers. We can appreciate it.
No, actually, it wasn't that I didn't want to hum it. It was that my boss jabbered me at the exact moment you all were forming the question, and I lost track of where I was. It's like, ah. So that's why I said no.
Okay. So we're humming then. Okay. So, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, do we need to decide this now? Hum in favor of this being Do we need to describe the versioning of information elements at this point in time? Hum in favor. Hum against.
That was actually close.
Because I voted out no.
You can almost feel some vibration.
You want to raise your hands because I felt like there was like
Yeah, too close.
2 and then 4.
My house don't
All
care.
right.
She's had to raise my hand.
Oh, okay. Okay, raise your hand if you're in favor of deciding this now. 2, 3, 4. Raise your hand if you're in favor of deferring. 4, 5, 6. 4 to 6.
That's a toss up. I don't know if it's the chairs.
Defer. Okay, so that's 7, 4 to 7. I say defer.
Not definitive. Nice.
I mean, we can,
No, it's not definitive. That's like,
we can,
chairs can make decisions too.
I say defer.
Yeah,
That's-
that's
Okay, then the chairs would say defer. Good.
cool.
Next
All
slide.
right, yeah, next
All
slide.
right, thank you.
So the second one was just around the naming conventions. Toss that out on the list, and it sounds like we can go with what we had, what IPFix uses. The one person who Jerome, who suggests he didn't really like the number 3, I think, number 4, I guess, but he said he could live with it. So we'll go forward with this because it's just. We'll just keep it as it is and just kind of keep moving forward. Although I think it would be beneficial to take in one suggestion that David made Monday, rather than using a vendor name, use something like the private enterprise number, which is a kind of a registry of organization identifiers, and that'll be more, I guess, unique and less opportunity for because people can represent a company name different ways depending on if you include things like incorporated and whatever. Think of like CPE. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Data types. So a couple of things we're going to do there. Basically, I had created different version data types for software versions as primitives. We're going to move those and just convert them to information elements. It's a really easy fix and reduces the, I guess, set of things that people have to implement. There's a request for an enumeration primitive data type. I think that will be useful, kind of considering doing something similar to lists and being able to just express some structure that can be parsed as needed. Would be good. And then we also received a proposal for the map data type, or at least something to look at. That's a data type we have to that we want to define, and we have to figure out a definition for it, and we have something to start with, I guess. And then on data type semantics, I heard kind of yes and no. It's one of those things. It's not clear to me why we definitely need it, but Chris, feel free to yell at me some more if you want. I'm just trying to make things as easy as possible for right now. And I guess I should add, looking at the list right now with things like identifier, quantity, flags, and maybe like delta counter, I don't know that those are super useful.
I would agree that those aren't useful, but having the underlying ability to specify it's not for building the information model that kind of we agree on in the room. It's for being able to extend the data model later via vendors without having to have everybody come back into the room. And so by having some of those types, and I agree with you on, say, like delta counter, it's not clear to me that that's applicable.
Yeah.
But having some of those other underlying types allows people to, outside of going through like kind of a expert review or a standards process to build those kind of extensions and have them interoperate without having to kind of get it published on an IANA site, have a code point, et cetera. And that's my argument for keeping some amount of data type semantics in place such that we can express them.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'm not, by not including them right now, I'm not, in my head, I'm not thinking like they'll never be included. It's just, you know, I didn't want to just add them in and just kind of leave it, just kind of, if we're not sure exactly what data type semantics, if we have a list of data type semantics and we can say, hey, these are useful to us, let's add them. But until then, I was just saying.
Fair enough. It's not clear to me that having a list structure and an association pointer might not be sufficient. The only thing that really kind of, so if we're willing to use kind of tuples for representations of things, I think that might be sufficient. If you want to do things like have a list of IP addresses and a list of net masks, right? It's how you associate those kind of different structures in encodings, right? And that's the parts that become trickier without being able to express some kind of semantics between them.
This is Hank. I would strongly vote for at least quantity. And the identifier argument is valid, I think. You can work around that in the information model. Probably the data models, again, need them. So having some guidance how they're actually used in the information model might be an inspiration for a data model, but it's not really necessary, I think. Semantics like choices are interesting. For example, having to decide if you want to have a set of identifying attributes or an identifier, or the whole thing you actually want to refer to is an interesting choice. But you could, for example, say, if you have an identifying attribute set and the whole thing, why? You should maybe even say on the information level that that's stupid, never do this. So you cannot express this if you don't have quantities and choices and such. So although this is, again, becoming a little prescriptive, maybe you want to do this. So my argument is basically quantity, very, very yes. The other ones are actually really helping, I think. And if you do it now, if you leave them out now, you have to add them later. And if you add them now and we decide against having them, you won't have to remove them later. So just think about what's more unlikely to happen. And I think it's more unlikely to happen to, if you include them now, that they will be removed later. It is more likely that if you not include them now, you have to include them later. So it's more work. That's my point of view also, I think.
Hank, adding them later says we add it to the template and we don't add the field to any of the current template points, the templates we start with. So that's like zero work. So I'm not too sure that adding it later is actually more work. Chris, what I heard you say was, in part, you were using data types to establish relationships in serializations of data models. And that I find to be somewhat troublesome, because I'd like to actually keep the relationships in the information model itself so I can talk about those relationships. So if what we're using this for is mostly serialization purposes, I really don't see the purpose of it.
So no, I think we need them in the information model so that we can express that within the information model. And then the data models, how that gets mapped to data models and serialization, that still has to be determined, but at some point you need to be able to have a common expression at the information model layer that allows you to establish those relationships. So no, it absolutely needs to be thought of at the information model of how we build those kind of relationships. Does that?
I don't think I can really do that, I'm not sure. I need examples.
Okay.
I mean, I'm happy to let this discussion continue on the list if you guys want. So maybe we'll do that with this one.
I think Danny just said move on, and I'm good.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. All right, so we talked about kind of the first data model requirement on Monday, and basically whether or not it was saying that any data model that is going to be used in Sacm has to implement the entire information model. And I think out of the discussion, we decided that it didn't. So something like SWID, which just covers software inventory, can be used in Sacm, and it also doesn't need to be updated to support, configuration and hardware and things like that. We also brought up this point about whether or not, really the information model right now is a combination of, two different types of data models. There's information that we get off the endpoint, things like SWID, OVAL, whatever there might be for hardware. And then you have, I guess, the Sacm, maybe I should put more of the control plane stuff for the data model, things like, metadata associated with this data, how do the Sacm components interact with each other? And so we may want to, I think we need to talk about this a little bit more, kind of this breakup between the two, kind of the control plane and the data plane. In just kind of quickly thinking about it, I don't know if this has any impact on things like requirements. For example, if for Sacm components, you need them to really, or Hank, were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, I just had the word impact on requirements, so I stand up. This is Hank. At the moment, I think DM014 says, and I think that is according to Jim's view, that every information element item has to be included in the data model, which is true for a data model that's supposed to be gluing them all together and leveraging other data models. And then again, these other data models, which are, for example, a good example at the moment is the SWID stuff. That does not necessarily has to be, in my point of view, to be included in the information with our items. So there's basically two types of data models you might think. And I think that's relating to your last bullet point, or overlast bullet point here.
Yeah.
That there is two kind of levels here, basically. I think that's the data models that exist, that we leverage, that we do not expect to incorporate completely into our information model, only enough that we can work with them and leverage them. And then there has to be these more simple subset of things you want to talk about as this glue data model. I think this is what DM014 is about.
Yeah, I actually have that.
And that every component has to at least understand a bit in order to negotiate data and do the all of our communication. And this should probably, as it's worded right now, map all of the information model items into that glue data model. So there are two things here, and this maybe this is wrong. Maybe my point of view is wrong, but this is the question. Is this the way we want to see things? Are there these two levels? And if so, we have a little bit, only tiny tweaks to the requirements that they reflect that. But because now there somehow seems to be conflicting. As with one saying that it's, important the other.
Yeah, so it may be useful to, for us to look at them with respect to that. Is what because I put DM14 up here because we brought it up when we were trying to rewrite one.
Okay.
So we'll have that. But I think we should probably just discuss more this issue on the list. And
yeah, I think so. But it is the requirements are fine actually. Most of the parts, it's actually okay. They could basically we could do them to the last call maybe even. But there's this tiny tweak that some of them seem to be a little bit conflicting. Karen?
You're suggesting that we need tiny tweaks to the requirements?
I think so. Can
I ask you to take a step back? Do you really want to open that door?
No.
Okay, I really don't want to open that door.
If you can, also, I don't think that this is again very, very personal point of view, please. Okay. I don't think that a data model has to satisfy all of them.
Right.
Always. The musts. It is more like a, how suitable is a data model to Sacm? If 100% match, wonderful. If not, okay, we can live with this. But there's a gap now, and we have to fill the gap with something else. This is somehow, again, modularity, but it is not a problem of the requirements. The requirements actually are fine step by step. I think Charles indicated as such. May I reiterate this, or is it? Okay. So each one of them makes total sense. In combination, it might be kind of quite difficult to find something existing that will match them. So in order not to shoot ourselves in the foot here, just accepting the fact that maybe it has not, although it's normative language and must, it's a problem, I guess. Match all of them. I don't want to open a can of worms here. I'm fine with moving forward. I will not ask for alteration. I just wanted to speak out loud that there might be overload of term data plane here. Data model, yes.
Right. I would, I would like to not open the requirements can of worms again.
I know.
Please.
We could.
I think that there's no such thing as perfect,
Yes.
and you need to get to your 80 or 90% solution and move on. And there might be gaps, there might be inconsistencies, there might be things that need to be fixed later, but done is better than perfect.
Wonderful. That is a very acceptable answer. So what you just said, we will not shoot ourselves in the foot if this is somehow inconsistent. That is perfectly acceptable for
No, if there's a mistake, if there's an inconsistency, we come back and fix it later.
Excellent. Also, I think with defining the term data model, we can sneak around that and say there are multiple layers of data models here, and then you can interpret in the requirements which one you're just referring to, which is somehow also, again, imprecise, but would allow us to move forward with the existing document basis, actually.
Right.
So, I don't know. And please, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. We will not open this. We can move forward with it. This is consistent enough. No problem at all. But I thought it was important to highlight this just one last time and then let it rest and maybe never speak of it again.
So thank you for highlighting it. Is there anybody that feels we need to, let me see. How many of you think we need to delve into this further at this point in time? How many of you'd like to move on?
All right. Well, I told you guys would probably hate me for bringing up some of these things. So. All right. Well, we can go to the next slide. So as part of the rewrite at DM1, basically it's broken up into 3 parts. It's kind of a notional thing where we last left off as of, I think, was it Hank or John? One of you guys sent an email out at like 1 a.m. But yeah, so basically the first part basically says if you're going to create a data model for Sacm, it has to implement at least one thing from the information model. It may map to more than one thing. Really, that's the second part is kind of the data model implementer decision. The second part is kind of making it very clear that a data model can contain things that are not in the information model. This covers basically extensions that, non-standard extensions, because I think we've talked quite a bit that we do want to support this. And then the last part's just kind of an example describing that. Should we bring this discussion to the list or just come up with a final proposal to say here?
So how close is that discussion to being done?
I think it's probably pretty close, right? For DM1.
So the only thing we said on Monday was we were going to do a tweak to DM1 to clarify it. So if you have something pretty close, just send it to the list.
Yeah, agreed.
And I would send it to the list with no wishy-washy language. Just say this is what we're proposing, and if you object strongly, provide an alternative.
We had but 3 people on Monday that said they were going to submit text for this. It seems like it should be something that's just a really quick thing to do. Submit the text, we'll look at it, we'll discuss the text, we'll put it in, done.
Yeah, okay. So this was John, Danny, and me who made I think 4 iterations on text, and I think everybody says it's good enough now. And yeah, I just want to stress that this will conflict the M14 still, but this is not a problem as we just hummed. Okay.
Yeah. And I can show you how it conflicts with the M14 in a minute if you guys want. Next slide. So for DM2, we just decided that we can live with this with the understanding that structure isn't relationships. So I think just to kind of capture that, I will send this out to the list and have it noted so it's kind of archived on our mailing list somewhere, and move on. So here's DM14. It's kind of a big requirement. Basically, the first part talks about how we need an attribute dictionary, and really it says, the collection and the data model for attribute collection and aggregation must be well understood and inclusive of their meaning or usage intent. I looked at this, and so I didn't even start picking this apart until the second thing, which I'll get to in a minute. But when I read the first part, I wasn't really sure how we could achieve that, because it seems like a very subjective statement. So I was just wondering if we could just get rid of it. I'm happy to move on if that's what people want. But really, the key part here is the second part, which says the data model must include all attributes defined in the information model and may include attributes beyond those found in the information model. That first part there conflicts with what we want DM1 to say. So really, I was just thinking we could simplify this requirement to just that last bullet, which just kind of covers that our data model should be extensible, given the framework in the IM. But again, happy to leave it as is if that's what people want. But I think we definitely need to fix that second part. So yeah, that's,
Sorry.
no, it's, I don't think anyone's jumping up to the mic, so that's fine. So yeah, then just some other things. I pulled section 8 out of the information model as basically a usage scenario that to me doesn't really belong in the information model. A usage scenario is something like the vulnerability assessment draft, right? That shows how, we're going to use the data in the information model and kind of shuffle that around to achieve some objective. There's some information elements covered in there. I think we can pull the, or I guess information needs covered in there. We can pull those into the information model as necessary, but I don't think we need that specific usage scenario in there. So I wanted to take that out, and then I just fixed some other typos and other issues that are now irrelevant given all the changes with the IM recently. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, next steps. These are basically the same things we had on Monday. So yeah, so we'll, I guess when we get back, we'll work to update the IPFix syntax issues that are, or have been, I guess, resolved. The other ones that still need open discussion, we'll send those out to the list and work those there. And I think once we have that in place, we can start taking some of those information elements from the internet, the draft that Nancy and Hank submitted, and pull those in, because those weren't expressed in IPFix, they're more prose description, but we can pull them in with our syntax in place. We didn't want to pull in the, tons of attributes that they had and have to change it later. Obviously, maybe some minor tweaks to the requirements, and then the DM1 at least. And then guidance is still a pretty big gap in the information model, and that's something we'll want to define more clearly, and that will also help kind of align with that endpoint information data model work as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. So next is Hank.
Oh, this software is nice.
And I don't think we have any slides or anything for that, right? We were just going to talk about it?
I sent the slides.
You did when?
Yeah.
Like just now?
In time.
29 minutes ago?
It's a slide, I think. So, yeah, I didn't. I read the email when I arrived here, so it was a little late. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So, hi, I'm Hank, and this is a internet draft I am writing in cooperation with Jessica Fitzgerald, Charles Smith, and David Waltermeyer. And it is basically a mapping of the existing ISO software identification standard that is also providing a XSD file to express software IDs. And next slide, please. We are doing this with the essential combination of encoding scripts in CBOR, defining the data structures with CDDL, and then signing all that with COSI. It's a very straightforward example and of how existing data can be used without carrying the old baggage of the representation of legacy JSON. And we have a lot of security considerations that are new, basically. And thank you, Charles, for that. I think a huge bunch of that Charles contributed, which are also missing from existing standards definitions that talk about software identifiers. So one of the, I think, highlights here is that we have a chance to provide security considerations in the context of example applications like software asset management, vulnerability assessment, or the provision of golden measurements for attestation, for example. And we also will give a freely available description of the attributes that are used in software identifiers, which is hidden in the free XML schema that is provided by ISO. But we will elaborate on those where we feel the need for it, where we think this is basically always underhandled, under-explained, and the consequences, again, this is the basis then for the security considerations. So this is the chance to make people better understand what the consequences here are using these documents that basically have multiple purposes. They can represent the measurement, the state of an endpoint, like what software did I find there, or the explicit expression of the vendor, how it's supposed to look like, or which installation media and package it comes from. So it already maps a lot of the information model items, the information elements from the information model of Sacm, and we can elaborate on this also in this document if you want. So it is a way to show how this will actually look in a workflow, how integration works in the IETF. And yeah, also thank you for COSI, Jim. This is actually making so much more sense than DSIG in XML. It's basically very easy to use. We composed a concise header that is selecting attributes from your draft and making them mandatory and leaving the others out. So have a small look at it. It is comprehensible text and not that large yet. Thank you. And the next slide is our pointers. But those are obvious pointers. Questions or comments? Okay.
How many people have read this thing? Sorry?
Is it this draft or the previous draft? It's that one.
Just the previous one.
It's right on the top.
Okay, like one person, two people. Okay. So
So,
I think we need more people to read it.
yeah, I think we need to read it and we just discuss it more in our next.
Okay. Need more people to review, so we have more discussion on it on the list, and then we'll take it from there.
I can push a pointer, these pointers to the. This is Hank. I can just push the pointers here from the slides to the list again, highlight a few, basically copying the slides into the email, and then it's just one slide, and then ask for a review if you want. I can even ask other workgroup members I know that are interested somehow in identifying software to review, if you like.
That's cool. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about the vulnerability draft next. That's yours, Danny, right? There's no presentation or anything. Like you're the one working on that right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. No. It's just a brief discussion. So we were, I believe, after 95, we said, or after, sorry, not 95, the last virtual interim, whenever that was, June? Was that June?
Yeah.
We said that we'd try to get that to working group last call, and that hasn't happened yet. But do we think that it's in good shape for that, or like, do you feel it's ready?
Yeah, all the issues are closed. So unless anyone has any other, I think technically there's one issue open, but it has to do with if we ever pull in server discovery about like a different spec. So that doesn't really matter right now. And then there was one other issue on kind of basically the level of detail of the information needs. But I think that's still an IM issue, so I don't know that that holds up the vulnerability draft.
Okay, probably not. It's informative, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So Karen, you think just put it through? Sweet. All right, thanks.
Yep.
So that was actually the last thing on the agenda, but we should talk about way forward. So I guess I'll put this over so I can type things if necessary. This is just kind of taking a stab at it. I think that the information model merge isn't quite done yet. Is that right? You said that you had to take some elements from the ID and bring it into.
Yeah, we have to do that. It's just a conversion thing. We were waiting for the syntax to be more fixed.
Okay. So we want to work towards completing that.
Yeah.
And do we want to put a timeline on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably fine.
What's reasonable?
Can we do prior to September, I guess?
Okay. Oh, yeah. We're probably thinking we'll have a September and an October, so 2 virtual interims between now and 97. September seems reasonable. October seems reasonable. And I think it's, I'd like to shoot for week of September 12th and week of October 10th. And we'll do doodle polls for that. Anybody object to those weeks immediately? Or, I mean, we can work out the details on the list, but Jim, was that you?
Yeah.
Okay, I understand you kind of go away.
The week before is going to be far better.
Week before, which, September or October?
September.
The week before is, I believe,
The week of Labor Day.
of Labor Day. Okay. All right, well, I'll shoot something out to the list and we'll try to figure out which week is best. Anyway, so there's probably a September virtual interim, not IV. I wrote IV twice up here, guys. All right. So if we can get an update to SWID M&A draft prior to September 1?
Yep.
All right. Update requirement DM001 and submit to ISG before September, hopefully sooner.
Yeah, like,
Go for it.
it would be really nice to get that done like in the next week or two. I mean, it was, okay. I mean, we're only talking like a sentence or two, right? Yeah. Okay.
And I assume we can do the same thing for the vulnerability working group last call.
Yeah, we're in your last
Okay.
call, we can.
What's missing? format? I mean, do we want to put
Oh.
anything here about that? Yeah,
We need to just do this, the small update to the charter about the dates, which you and I can do.
okay.
We can extend the charter for 6 months and then,
You can't close you guys today?
no,
That's what I was like there.
Do we want to talk about things like we've talked about investigating Yang, looking at Sacm requirements analysis? I think that was all for the information model, right? No, that was the data model, endpoint data model stuff. I mean,
Yeah, we're going to continue to do.
two things. One, you might want to move to a mic. Second thing, it would be, I think it would be helpful for everyone if we had a roadmap of what the next steps were and what the documents were that we wanted.
Okay, we can put something like that together.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be, detailed and formal, but we seem to be talking about a lot of bits, and it's not clear to me what we want to complete in what time frame. And none of this has to be set in stone, but it's helpful to have an idea of where you're headed, and it's not clear to me that, at least I don't have that idea.
This is Hank speaking. In order to move forward, what I would like to ask for is some, I don't know, decisions or clarification about how registration, authorization, and authentication is going to work, because I think this is a gap at the moment, and I would not know how to build a second component, because I would not know how how registration works, how the second domain will be composed. So the operations there are absolutely unclear to me at the moment. So this is what I would think is required to move forward. Yeah, that's one thing. And if you have this, if you somehow know how to register and to propagate capabilities, I think that would really help to understand and help implementers and solutions.
clarifying question on that. So do
Yeah.
you believe it's required to move forward from this point, or required to move forward as?
No, not exactly from this
solution.
one, but this is open so long now, and I think nothing happens there. And at some point, we have to start working on this, or someone has, I think.
I don't disagree that we have to get to the point of of discussing that.
Yeah, because it is impossible to build from the scratch proof of concept without that, and that's bad. I would like to see running code at some point that basically
So
works.
I agree at some point it would be bad. I'm not necessarily in agreement that it's bad right now.
Okay.
I think that we're still trying to figure out a lot of things architecturally. I think we're still trying to figure out a lot of things about just basic data models,
Okay.
serializations, finishing the information model.
Huh. Well, because my impression was that the architecture is basically stable because we parked it. Or are we waiting for a revolutionary input that will? Okay, because then maybe my impression was wrong. So maybe it is basically there's something to do at the architecture. But if it is, I'm not aware of what.
Right.
So
Right.
okay.
It's duly noted, and I agree that we can't finish work without doing those things. I'm just not sure they're critical at this point, but others may disagree.
And if I remember, you were basically bringing up the topic on the mail list.
I do.
Yeah. So I agree with you, Adam.
I disagree.
I disagree with myself. Right? That happens a lot. Okay. Voices in my head.
There are voices disagreeing with you. So I would be curious then what people think the important next steps are. What should we focus on? So that's a very poorly worded question, but yep.
I think it's a perfectly worded, Jim Schott, I think it's a perfectly worded question. Because I think there's a lot of things that we're doing, and I think I think we need to actually sit down and look to see if we're doing it in the right order. Because I think we're running around making decisions that we may have to backtrack later because we are going to end up doing something that says that's not the right thing we should have had. So, I mean, the number one most important thing that I think we should be doing in this working group today is defining the information model. Because once we have the information model, data models flow from that, serializations flow from that. Once you have that, you can start talking about what does it take to do to ask questions of the information model? What does it take to do to publish information into a data model? All of that stuff starts flowing, but until we know what the information model looks like, and if we can use the information model, we don't have anything to talk about.
This is Hank again, sorry. Yes, of course. And in the progress of doing this with the information model, I think operations somehow influence the layout of the, don't think so? You're pretty confident about this. Okay, then I will believe you and I will leave unconcerned. Okay.
Yes, so,
I'm Jessica. I think we need to address the architecture soon. When we parked it, we were waiting for solutions drafts. Now that we are considering partial solutions, we need to consider the architecture as part meets that solution.
okay. I think one of the things, I think on Friday at the IETF, we're probably a little bit brain dead and weary. I think for the virtual interim, we need to have it would be really nice to sort of have a roadmap of what we think the next few steps are. I do think we need to, I mean, some of these, I think we need to, as a group, we need to think about how we can make faster, more consistent progress. And I don't have the answers to that right now. I'm not sure that anybody has the answers to that. But so I'd like to see a rough roadmap of where we're headed. And then I would like to see some thoughts on how we actually get that roadmap executed. I think, anyway, I'll just stop. And maybe this is a conversation that we should properly prep instead of doing it ad hoc on Friday. But
Kathleen Moriarty. So I'm actually glad to hear you bringing that up, and I think it's a positive step. I think this week was a positive step, right? Because there were certain conversations that have been going on for a long time, and you're helping to come up with decisions on that so that we can just move beyond them. And I think there's been perceived senses of consensus, but without the chair stepping in and getting the sense of the entire working group, there's no way to really assess that full consensus if only a couple of people are chatting on something, because a few people doesn't make for consensus. So thank you for, I think that type of thing will help a lot personally.
anything else?
Nope.
Okay, with that, we give you back time. 40 minutes. Enjoy your day.
Thanks, everybody. The way, Charles.
So,
Hold on a second.
Yeah. Recorded for posterity.
Yeah, yeah, right. Other blue sheet? Where is it? Blue sheet?
That's actually one of the ways I spelled it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
What a fiasco.
Hmm?
What a fiasco.
Right. All right.